My brother-in-law brought a 19-year-old stranger into his father's house the week after Thanksgiving. And by the second night, we could hear the boy crying through the walls. That sentence sounds wrong, I know. Let me back up. Harold Whitmore built his house with his own hands. Not literally, he was a civil engineer, not a laborer, but he drew every floor plan, approved every nail, and stood on that Connecticut property in Westport for 3 days straight while the foundation was poured. The house was his life's evidence. 4,000 square feet of white colonial with black shutters, a wraparound porch, and a separate guest wing off the back that Sylvia, his late wife, had always called the overflow suite because her sister visited every summer and needed her own entrance. Sylvia passed away 11 months before any of this happened. Congestive heart failure. She was 63 and had been sick for 2 years, so it wasn't a shock exactly, but grief doesn't care about your expectations. Patrick, my husband, drove to his parents' house and sat in the driveway for 40 minutes before he could make himself go inside. I watched from the passenger seat and didn't rush him. Harold took it badly in a way that was invisible to most people. He kept running the company. Whitmore Construction had been operating for 30 years, and Patrick managed the day-to-day now, but Harold still showed up to the office 3 days a week in his tan Carhartt jacket like nothing had changed. He ate dinner. He answered emails. He made it to every family Sunday. But I had been married to Patrick for 9 years. I had watched Harold for 9 years. I knew how he held his coffee mug when something was wrong. Both hands tight, like he was afraid it might drift away. He held it like that a lot, that fall. So when he called a Sunday dinner and told us he had an announcement, Patrick assumed it was something about the company. Denise, Patrick's younger sister, arrived in that particular shade of cheerful. That means she's already nervous. Her husband Roger came in behind her, wearing a fleece vest over a button-down, because he'd read somewhere that combination says approachable but serious. Roger always looked like he was interviewing for something. Dorothy, who had cleaned Harold's house twice a week since Sylvia's diagnosis, served pot roast and set a place at the table like it was a regular Sunday. It wasn't. Harold waited until we all had food in front of us, then he set his fork down. "I've got a young man staying in the guest wing," he said. "His name is Cody. He arrived yesterday. He'll be here for a while." Denise stopped cutting her meat. Patrick looked up from his plate. Roger didn't move, but I noticed his jaw tighten by exactly 1 degree. "Who is he?" Patrick asked. Harold picked his fork back up. "Son of an old friend. He's got nowhere to go right now. He needs some help." "What kind of help?" I asked. I kept my voice easy. "I work in hospital billing administration. I've spent 15 years asking questions that sound casual when they're not." "Medical. He's not well." Harold took a bite, chewed, swallowed. He did all of it like a man who has decided he is finished explaining himself. I'd appreciate it if everyone would give him space while he gets settled. Denise laughed once, short and dry, the way she does when something bothers her, but she isn't ready to say so. "Dad, you can't just bring a stranger into the house and tell us to give him space." "I just did." Patrick set his napkin on the table. "How old is this kid?" 19. The room went quiet in a specific way, the kind of quiet where everyone is doing math and nobody likes their answer. Roger spoke up. His voice was measured, warm, the kind of tone that sounds like he's doing you a favor. "Dad, I hear you, and I think it's generous that you want to help someone. But with everything going on with the company, the last thing we need is an unknown variable in the house. What if this kid has legal trouble? What if he's unstable? Mom's only been gone 11 months. Harold looked at Roger for a long moment, then he looked back at his plate. "Thank you for your concern, Roger." That was all he said. Roger nodded and smiled slightly, like he'd scored a point. I've never trusted a man who smiles when he's been dismissed. The guest wing had its own entrance through the back hallway, a private bathroom, and a door with a standard lock that Harold had replaced by Monday morning. I know this because I stopped by to drop off a casserole dish I'd borrowed and saw the locksmith's truck in the driveway. The new lock was a keypad. Harold was standing on the porch watching the man work. "Updating security?" I said. He looked at me. "Privacy," he said. "Cody needs privacy." "Is he contagious?" Something crossed Harold's face quick, and then it was gone. "No, he just needs quiet." I handed him the casserole dish and went home. Over the next week, the house operated the way it always had on the outside. Dorothy came Tuesday and Friday. Harold went to the office Monday and Wednesday. But Dorothy mentioned, when I ran into her at the grocery store on Thursday, that she wasn't allowed in the back hallway anymore. He leaves a tray outside the guest wing door, she said, frowning at the soup cans like they were personally responsible. Breakfast and lunch. I make it, and he takes it back there himself. Half the time it comes back barely touched. What does he look like? I asked. The boy. Dorothy thought about it. I caught a glimpse once. Thin, very thin, dark circles. He was just sitting on the edge of the bed when the door opened. She shook her head. He didn't look like a kid on vacation, I'll tell you that. Patrick was trying to give his father the benefit of the doubt. I watched him do it all week. Watched him almost call Harold twice, and then put his phone down. He had a particular silence he carried around after his mother died, a silence that lived in the space between wanting to push and not wanting to cause more pain. His father was grieving. His father had always been private. Maybe this was just Harold being Harold. Then on the 5th night, I heard it. We were staying over that weekend. Patrick and I take the upstairs guest room, sometimes on Saturdays, so we can help Harold with yard work on Sunday, which is the only way he'll accept help without arguing. The house was quiet after 11. I was reading. Patrick was asleep. And from the back of the house, faint but unmistakable, came the sound of someone crying. Not sobbing. Not the loud, desperate kind. The kind you hear through walls, restrained, pressured, like someone pushing it down and losing. And underneath it, Harold's voice, low and steady. I couldn't make out the words, just the rhythm of him talking someone through something. I put my book down. In the morning, Harold came to breakfast with a long scratch on his forearm. He'd covered it badly with his sleeve. But when he reached across the table for the butter, the sleeve rode up. Denise was there. She'd driven up early, ostensibly to bring muffins, actually to check on things. She stared at the scratch. Dad, what happened to your arm? I caught it on a branch, Harold said. There are no branches inside the house. Harold pulled his sleeve down. It's nothing. Denise looked at me. I looked at my coffee. Roger arrived around 10, leather laptop bag over his shoulder, because apparently a casual Sunday visit requires a laptop bag. He sat in the living room with Harold and spent 45 minutes asking gentle, careful questions about the company's current contracts. Harold answered them. I sat in the kitchen pretending to read the paper and listening to every word. Roger's framing was always the same. Concern wrapped around appetite. He talked about protecting Sylvia's legacy. He talked about how the company's reputation was Harold's life's work. He suggested, twice, that with Harold distracted by this guest situation, it might be smart to have Denise more formally involved in company decisions. Not to take over, just to provide stability. For the board, for the partners. Denise owned 15% of Whitmore Construction. Sylvia had left it to her specifically. Patrick owned 30. Harold controlled the rest. I put the newspaper down and walked into the living room. Roger, I said, what's Denise's involvement in the company right now? He smiled at me. She's a shareholder, which is exactly why I'm suggesting. She doesn't have voting rights on operational decisions. That's in the company bylaws. Harold structured it that way specifically so day-to-day operations weren't subject to shareholder votes. I kept my voice friendly. I just want to make sure we're all working from the same document. Roger held the smile for a beat longer than natural. Of course, just exploring options. Harold watched this exchange. He didn't say anything. But when Roger went to refill his coffee, Harold looked at me and gave one small, short nod. That night, at nearly 1 a.m, the sound from the guest wing wasn't crying. It was screaming. Patrick was on his feet before I was fully awake. By the time I reached the hallway, he was already at the top of the stairs, gripping the railing. The sound was coming through the walls, raw, awful, the specific pitch of someone in physical pain and not able to contain it. Harold's voice, louder now. Cody, look at me. Stay with me. Patrick took the stairs 2 at a time. I was right behind him. The back hallway was dark. The keypad on the guest wing door glowed green. Patrick pounded on it. Dad, open the door. No answer. Another broken sound from inside. Something between a gasp and a sob. Dad, I swear to God, open this door or I'm breaking it. From inside, Harold's voice, I have it under control. Patrick took 3 steps back and hit the door at the lock with his shoulder. The hollow core door was not built for that. The frame cracked on the second hit. The latch gave on the third. and the door swung open hard enough to bang against the wall inside. We both stopped. Cody was on the bed, curled on his side, shaking. His hands were pressed against his abdomen. His face was the gray-white of someone who has been sick for a long time, and gotten worse tonight. Harold was beside him, one hand on the boy's shoulder, the other holding a phone. He'd been trying to call someone. On the nightstand, a blood pressure cuff, a digital thermometer, a stack of prescription bottles, a bowl of water with a cloth in it. No candles, no romance, no scandal. A sick teenager and an old man who was clearly terrified. I stepped inside. What is his condition? Harold looked at me. His eyes were red. He hadn't slept. Crohn's, severe flare. He runs a fever when it gets bad and the cramping. He stopped. I've been managing it, but tonight it got ahead of me. Has he eaten? He can't keep much down. I looked at Cody. He was looking at me, glassy, embarrassed. He said, in a voice like gravel, I'm sorry for the noise. 19 years old, apologizing for crying in pain. I said, don't be ridiculous. I turned to Harold. Call Dr. Ingram, right now. Patrick, get a glass of water. Patrick hadn't moved. He was staring at his father. Why didn't you just tell us he was sick? Harold didn't answer. Dad. Patrick's voice had dropped to something quieter and more dangerous than yelling. Why didn't you say the kid was sick? We could have helped. We would have helped. Cody made a sound, involuntary, like a hiccup, and then said, barely audible, please don't blame him. He was trying to protect me. Protect you from what? Patrick said. Cody looked at Harold. Something passed between them, the specific look of someone asking for permission. Harold sat down on the edge of the bed. He looked, in that moment, about 100 years old. Dr. Ingram arrived within the hour, assessed Cody, administered something through a line he ran in Cody's hand, and spent several minutes speaking quietly with Harold in the doorway. I heard the word hospital twice and stable for now once. By 2:30 in the morning, Cody was sleeping. His breathing had evened out. The color had started returning to his face. The rest of us went to the kitchen. Harold sat at the table with his hands wrapped around a mug of tea that Dorothy had made before going to bed. Patrick stood by the window. I sat across from Harold. Tell us, I said. He did. 32 years ago, before Harold met Sylvia, he'd been engaged to a woman named Gail. The engagement fell apart badly. Harold's fault, he said, and he said it without flinching. Gail moved back to Ohio. Harold moved on, met Sylvia, built a life. What he didn't know, what he didn't find out until 8 weeks ago, was that Gail had been pregnant when she left. She'd raised the baby alone, a daughter named Wendy, and she'd never told Harold because she hadn't wanted anything from him. Wendy grew up, got married young, had Cody at 20. And then Wendy got sick, and then Gail got sick. And then both of them died within 6 months of each other. And Cody was 19 years old with a chronic illness, no insurance, and a step-uncle named Vince who had taken him in for 3 months before deciding that a sick kid with medical bills was more liability than he wanted. Vince had called Harold, not out of goodwill, out of leverage. He found me through a DNA testing site, Harold said. Wendy had done one of those ancestry kits years ago. The results were still in the system. He figured out who I was. He called me, told me about Cody, told me Wendy had been my daughter, and then told me that for $50,000 he would handle Cody's situation quietly and I'd never hear from any of them again. I put my mug down. He was going to sell the kid. Harold nodded. He was already talking to some people about Cody moving in as a caretaker for an elderly man in the county. The kind of arrangement that isn't an arrangement. It's a trap. Patrick had turned from the window. His face was unreadable in the way that means he's working very hard to keep it that way. I demanded proof, Harold continued. A DNA test. Vince didn't want to do it. I told him no test, no money. He did it. Harold reached into the pocket of his flannel shirt and pulled out a folded paper. He set it on the table without opening it. Cody is Wendy's son. Wendy was mine. Patrick picked up the paper, unfolded it. I leaned over to read. Probability of paternity as biological grandfather 99.7%. So you brought him here, Patrick said. I couldn't leave him there. You could have told us the truth. Harold looked at his son. I was afraid you'd hate me. The kitchen was very quiet. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, the Connecticut wind was moving through the bare trees. Sylvia had been gone 8 months, Harold said. You were all still grieving. I couldn't walk in and tell you I'd had a daughter with someone else before I met your mother. I couldn't. He stopped. And I was afraid that if I said, Cody was my grandson, the first thing you'd think was that he was there for the company, the estate. I didn't want anyone looking at a sick 19-year-old boy like he was a threat. Patrick set the paper back on the table. He didn't say anything for a while. Finally, I said, Harold, I need to ask you something about Roger. Harold looked at me. What about him? I'd spent the week watching Roger the way I watch billing codes that don't add up. Not accusatory, just careful. The laptop bag at a family Sunday. The way his questions about company structure always followed news about Cody. The way he'd volunteered Denise's name for expanded company involvement twice in one conversation, in language that Denise would never use herself. Has he asked you to sign anything? Harold was quiet for a moment. Then, he emailed me a draft last week, a temporary operational agreement he called it. Said it would protect the company's reputation in case the situation with Cody became publicly awkward. He wanted Denise to have co-signing authority on major contracts while things settled down. Did you sign it? No, something about it felt off. I thought about that. Can I see it? Harold got up, went to his office, came back with a printout. I read it. It was well drafted, too well drafted for something Roger had put together over a weekend. The language about reputational risk management was boilerplate, but buried in the operational addendum, Denise would have had the authority to approve contract bids over $200,000. Whitmore Construction's average project was $400,000. And Denise, sweet as she was, had never once sat through a full board meeting without checking her phone. Roger drafted this, I said. Not for Denise, for himself. If Denise has approval authority, Roger advises Denise. Roger effectively controls which contracts get approved. He picks the ones that benefit his investors. Patrick walked over and looked at the paper. I watched his face change. I said, he's been nursing a real estate development deal in Fairfield County for 2 years. I looked it up. 3 commercial lots, all stalled. He needs a general contractor with a clean reputation to take on the anchor project. Guess who fits that description? He wanted to use Whitmore Construction, Patrick said flatly, without us knowing. He wanted the appearance of co-signing authority to be enough of a foothold. Once Denise was on the paperwork, he had time to maneuver. We sat with that for a moment. Harold set his mug down. He knew about Cody. He suspected something was wrong, and he watched for the right moment to offer himself as the solution, I said. That's how it works. You create the chaos or wait for it, and then you show up with a clipboard. 3 days later, things came to a head the way they always do, all at once, badly. Roger arrived on a Wednesday morning with Denise, a printed copy of the operational agreement, and what he described as a simple housekeeping step. He sat across from Harold in the living room and explained, with the patience of a very polite bulldozer, that the situation with Cody, the locked door, the secrecy, the medical supplies, had already reached people at Harold's construction firm. A foreman had mentioned it to a project manager. Word travels. It doesn't have to become a scandal, Roger said. It doesn't have to touch the company. Denise just signs on for a few months. We stabilize things, and when you've sorted out the legal situation with the boy, everything goes back to normal. Denise was sitting next to her husband with her hands in her lap. She looked the way she always looked when Roger was talking, like she was translating in real time and falling behind. I was there because Patrick had asked me to be. He was standing by the fireplace. Harold looked at the agreement on the coffee table and didn't touch it. I said, Roger, I pulled your Fairfield County LLC filings this week. He turned to look at me. I beg your pardon. Bridgeview Properties LLC, you're the managing member. You've got 3 stalled lots in Fairfield County, and a lender who wants a general contractor with liability insurance and an established track record before they release Phase 2 financing. I kept my voice the same way I keep it at work when I'm explaining a billing error to a doctor who is used to not being questioned. If Whitmore Construction takes on the anchor project, your lender is satisfied, your LLC has cover, and you don't have to disclose the conflict of interest because technically Denise signed the contracts, not you. Roger looked at me for a long moment. That's a serious accusation. It's an observation based on public filings, I said. If it's wrong, tell me what I got wrong. He didn't. Denise had gone very still. She was looking at her husband. Roger, she said. Her voice was careful. Did you know about this before you drafted the agreement? Denise. Did you know? The silence that followed was answer enough. Denise picked up the agreement from the coffee table. She held it for a moment. Then she tore it in half, set both pieces down, and stood up. She looked at her father. I want to meet Cody. Harold took her down the hall himself. What happened next was quiet and slow, the way real things often are. Cody was awake, propped against the headboard, with a book he wasn't reading. He looked terrified when Denise walked in. She stood in the doorway for a moment, taking in the prescription bottles, and the blood pressure cuff, and the thermometer on the nightstand. The exact same setup that had looked suspicious from the outside, and now looked like what it was. She sat down in the chair by the window. I'm Denise, she said. I'm apparently your aunt. Cody blinked. I'm really sorry, he said. I didn't mean for any of this. Stop apologizing. Her voice was sharp the way it gets when she's covering something softer. Are you hungry? Dorothy made chicken soup, and I'm going to bring you some, whether you want it or not. Roger left without saying goodbye. I don't know when exactly. I didn't watch him go. Denise told me later that evening that she'd spoken to an attorney. Her own, not the family's. Stuart, Harold's estate lawyer, came to the house on Thursday. Harold sat him down and laid it out. The DNA result, Gail's history, Wendy, Cody's medical situation, and Vince's demands. Stuart listened without interrupting. Then he said, We file the paternity declaration in probate court, establish Cody's legal status as your descendant, and build a medical trust for his treatment. That's the clean path. It protects him, and it protects the family. And Vince? Patrick asked. If he made a verbal demand for payment in exchange for not exposing this information, that's extortion. Your word against his right now, but if he makes contact again, we record it and we file. He did make contact again. 2 weeks later, by text, we recorded it, Stuart filed. Vince hired a lawyer who sent one letter and then went quiet. By December, Cody had been seen by a GI specialist at Yale New Haven. His condition was serious but manageable, with the right protocol. He started treatment. He stopped apologizing for taking up space, gradually, the way people do when they start to believe they're allowed to be somewhere. The guest wing door stayed open. The first Sunday, Cody sat at the dinner table with everyone. Dorothy made a standing rib roast and spent 20 minutes explaining to him what each dish was. He ate slowly, carefully, the way you do when your body has taught you that eating comes with consequences. But he ate. Patrick and I drove home that night, in the dark, the headlights cutting through December fog on the post road. He was quiet for a while. I almost broke that door down for the wrong reasons, he said finally. I looked at him. You broke it down because someone inside was hurting. The reasons sorted themselves out after. He nodded. Drove then. Dad should have just told us. He was afraid. Of us. Of disappointing you. It's not the same thing, but it feels like it when you're in it. Patrick was quiet for another mile. I keep thinking about Cody's mom, he said. She raised a kid alone, sick or not, and she never once tried to find my dad and make his life difficult. She just raised the kid. Some people are decent without needing an audience for it. He drove. The fog was thicker near the water. I'm going to try to be decent about this, Patrick said. I don't know how long it'll take to fully work out what I think about all of it, but I'm going to try. That was enough for that night. That was enough. The guest wing isn't the guest wing anymore. Harold had the room repainted in February. The old beige was too clinical, Cody said. And Harold treated that observation like an order. It's a soft gray now, with curtains Denise picked out because she wanted something to do with her hands that helped. Cody is not fixed. The disease doesn't fix. But he's managed, he's stable, and he woke up last Tuesday and told Dorothy her biscuits were the best thing he'd ever eaten, which she received by immediately making another batch and refusing to accept any compliment about it. Harold goes to every treatment appointment. He drives, he waits, he brings a crossword puzzle he never finishes, because he keeps looking up to check the door. What I know now that I didn't know a year ago. The most dangerous thing in a family isn't the secret. It's the silence that grows up around the secret, because silence is where other people want things. Roger didn't create the problem. Roger found the problem and decided to make it useful. That's what people like Roger do. They look for the pressure points, and they wait. The thing about keeping a door locked is that it doesn't just keep one thing in. It keeps everything else out, including the people who might have actually helped. Harold knows that now. He says it, sometimes, at the end of Sunday dinners, when the table is full and the food is going cold because no one wants to be the first to leave. He says, the truth costs something up front. But the lie costs everything, eventually, and it takes people you love down with it. The table is full these days. It's louder than it used to be. We make room for that.